And welcome, Destiny Christian Church. Today I'm going to share something that I shared Sunday that was not recorded. And sometimes we don't always get to record stuff, but I'm recording it this way. The same thing we shared. And have you ever felt a persistent sense of restlessness where no matter what you achieve, it doesn't seem like it's enough? It's akin to exerting effort on a treadmill that expends energy, but it leads nowhere. And there was a Greek figure named Sisyphus who was condemned to eternity by the gods for something he did. But he was condemned to do this. He had to take this massive stone and roll it uphill only for it to roll back down. And the Israelites in Egypt experienced the same kind of futile unease under Pharaoh's oppressive system, where they felt like they were in slavery and their lives weren't getting anywhere. In fact, their lives were getting far worse. Have you ever felt like that in your life, where there's the constant effort and energy, but you're not getting anywhere? And it's typified in these words that the oppressor gave to Israel, and the oppressor here is Pharaoh. He says, "You are no longer to supply these people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw." And that's Exodus. And I say that to say that this is the idea of bricks without straw. But what does it symbolize, this straw without bricks idea? Because straw was readily available from their taskmasters, right? So it made the job much easier, that if they had the straw and they had the mud, they're all done. But with the Pharaoh's edict to let them gather their own straw, they were forced to function in an unnatural. So I say that to say that this speaks of anti-creation. And anti-creation is when you're asked to do something or told to do something that is unnatural. Kind of like trying to hammer a nail with a feather. It's when something functions in a way that it was not created to function in. And we were made for hard work, yes, but we were not made for striving, which is different, which is the pointless rut kind of existence of feeling separated and alienated from yourself. And I believe that the bricks without straw is a picture of this unnatural way in which we move through this world, because we live in a system of Pharaoh, in a sense, of spiritual pharaohs that have demands on us. The world system based on much greed and pushing forward and saying, you got to gain the whole world. But bricks, just to talk about bricks, the Egyptians used this clay from the river and combined it with straw for stability. And think about the plaster walls, right? The old-fashioned plaster walls that had either the slats or they had like this metal mesh inside of them. Imagine if somebody told you, "I expect you to make the same kind of strong walls, except you don't get any slats or you don't get any metal mesh." This was the equivalent of what Israel was told to do. Thus, their efforts became futile as they had to summon the energy to gather straw by hand, which is nearly impossible. Imagine, and I've heard this before in modern times, the idea that someone says, 3 people got fired and have to take up the slack of their job. Boy, does that sound familiar? And they burn out in the process, and they may even get paid more. But what's the point if you can't enjoy it? What's the point if your life is thrown out of balance? So bricks without straw also typifies our modern culture of pursuit of more. The modern culture is based on this endless striving in pursuit of more, which is rooted in greed. And while holding the eternal less, right? The things that are really important, right? Paul said, don't look to the things that are seen, but things that are unseen, because the unseen is more important, right? Yes, the seen is important, but what good is having all the seen, everything your eye sees, if you don't take care of the unseen, of the eternal? So today's culture, work schedules can eclipse family, friends, spouses, and even spiritual life. And again, it's not unlike the Israelites. We too have traded whips for impossible schedules and lashes for unrealistic demands of bosses and employers, and even stuff we put on ourselves, ambitions that God didn't give us. God gives us ambitions, but there's ambitions sometimes based on our own lust and greed, that we have to have that extra car to compete with our neighbors or the bigger house, right? So what's at stake at all this? What's at stake? Today's pharaohs demand with harsh with a harsh tone and with harsh eyes, you can gain the whole world by doing more, spending more, consuming more, and in a long head rush to accomplish things. Pharaoh's system seems oblivious to what is at stake, our very souls. So the bricks without straw battle it's also typified in human determinism without God. What do I mean by that? From a secular perspective, bricks without straw symbolizes human perseverance despite adversity. And you've heard of the triumph of the human spirit and, the Ubermensch, that perfect man that was talked about in the Enlightenment of saying we're going to make this perfect man. And Hitler was inspired by that idea of making Germany the perfect human beings. But it's all done without God. And some philosophers saw that guy Sisyphus we talked about in a different way. They didn't see it as just he was condemned to eternity, but people like Albert Camus, who was a philosopher, he saw Sisyphus not as futilely rolling a stone uphill, but as defiantly doing so against hopelessness. And again, the triumph of the human spirit. We can do this. We don't care what God says or not. We're going to do it. And this represents the humanistic choice to persist and grow despite a seemingly pointless existence. The problem with this thinking is this: finding meaning and purpose in the struggle isn't enough. In fact, there's a great book where the author says, if you find the why, you can almost put up with any what. That's a good point to make. But only God can ultimately give us the why, the meaning beyond our present struggles. But another thing about bricks without straw is that bricks without straw can also symbolize a necessary transition, a transition that is prompted by God's intervention. What do I mean by that? Sometimes God steps in and gives us cattle prods to move us out of our comfort zone. And yes, we can even grow comfortable in our bondage. We can grow comfortable in our ruts because it's predictable, it's under our control, and even though I hate it, there's a almost like a twisted sense of comfort about it. The sameness. Imagine a mom getting her infant off the milk. When the mother weans her infant off the milk, an uncomfortable transition occurs with the child from milk to solid food. No one likes change. And so human nature is to resist when radical change comes upon us. And God is never static. God is always moving and changing things in our lives. Just when we think we can put him in a box and have our theology all set and put a bow on it, he hops out of it and blows our minds. That's why, whenever I hear people sound like they have the teaching that everybody's wrong but they're right, I caution against that kind of mentality because, first of all, it's pride. Second of all, there's no accountability. Where's the community that we're exegeting together with, right? And it's always done in humility. But think about God weaning the Israelites off of being comfortable in Egypt. Before God could take Israel out of Egypt, he had to begin the process of removing Egypt out of Israel. And Pharaoh's bricks without straw were the cattle prods of motivation to poise God's people for a great transition from slavery to freedom. Sometimes it hurts to be delivered because we got uncomfortable. And God says, I don't want you there. I want you out. So I'm going to push you to where you need to be. So what happens when we are stuck in this vicious cycle of more that is found in Pharaoh's system, in modern Pharaoh system of greed and, of acquisitiveness? Well, we see, number one, we see through the illusion of more. In other words, we end up with less on every level. And, everywhere you look when you think about it, so many people are exhausted and burned out because of the impossible tasks that have been laid on their shoulders. And this has been laid mostly by the world system we live in, which is based in mostly in greed. But also sometimes we put it on ourselves when we become greedy and when we have to have something that we don't really need. So we have less time and are expected to produce more, less resources, but expected to pay more, and less rest, but expected to carry more. And the more always promises to satisfy, but inevitably leaves you barren and burned out. And then we struggle with the feelings of failure. That's a second thing that happens when we're stuck in this cycle of Pharaoh system. We struggle with feeling like a failure because we didn't get the goal done. We didn't get everything done perfectly. And the natural result in the relentless pursuit is one that makes you feel perpetually lazy and like an abject failure because you are not getting it done. You're just not getting enough bricks made for Pharaoh. And as Walter Brueggemann puts it beautifully, you end up counting bricks in vain from your bed at night. I think that's such a picture when you think about it. How many people get up at 3 and 4 in the morning? They're just awake. And they're thinking about all the things they have to do that they're like, I don't know how I'm going to get it done. I'm exhausted. And I start the week exhausted and I end it exhausted. How am I going to get it done? Because of Pharaoh's demands, we become subtly disconnected from the way that we were made. And that's what I mean by alienation from our loved ones. You know, our loved ones, we feel separated from them, even from ourselves. You know, self-alienation is when you feel like you could be experiencing something wonderful, but you don't feel it. You're not in touch with your feelings because you're so burned out. You're so distracted by making bricks that you don't even know who you are anymore. You don't feel anything. And so because we've exchanged intimacy for more production, intimacy with others, intimacy with God. So what's at the heart of it all? Hint, it's more than a type A personality quirk, right? This whole striving thing, because we have type A's and type B's. But think about the fall of humanity in Genesis 3. It's something much deeper than just Adam and Eve falling into sin and being kicked out of the garden. When they were originally created, Adam and Eve, they worked the garden, right? That was their mandate, work the garden. And so there was hard work in stewarding the earth. But the key is that there was no striving to this hard work. And I believe that this has much to do with the fall, you know, the curse of earning things by the sweat of the brow, that after the fall, God said you're going to earn your keep basically by the sweat of your brow. In other words, now when you work, you're going to feel this. There's going to be a striving. You're going to always struggle with striving now. And so before the fall, Adam and Eve worked hard, keeping the garden, right? Stewardship, but there was no striving in it. But after the fall, it was a different story. The lines between hard work and striving became blurred. One line was rooted in how we were created. The other in how Pharaoh's system seeks to recreate us by turning us into these impersonal cold machines that just crank out bricks but have no life in us. So I say that to say this, that we must return to the way we were created. God's response to the dizzying pace that we live in is to return to the way that He made us, a place where we work hard and expend energy and have a true purpose and motivation and ambition in life, but then know when to stop, when to renew, when to reflect, and when to rethink. And hence there's one word I want to give you today, and this is where all this was leading to: Sabbath, a Sabbath rest, or Shabbat. The Bible calls this Sabbath, Shabbat, right? Though a Sabbath is not demanded in the New Testament as it was in the Old, because the Old Covenant under Moses, his law, was that Sabbath was a big deal. In the New Testament, Jesus said man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. And this was the perspective Jesus gave in the New Testament, that He's not against the Sabbath, but He's giving you the real purpose of it. It's for you to renew and refresh yourself. And Jesus' words that the Sabbath was made for man underscores this reality. When you stop, you are telling time that you are not defined by it, but we're created for something more than seconds and minutes and hours and days and months and years. You were created for eternity. And that's why you're going to spend time being alive in God as a human being, being with your families, being with people you love. Abraham Heschel stated poetically, the Sabbath is a celebration of the intersection between time and eternity. It shows a loving God reaching through eternity to touch us in time. You can't avoid the pharaohs of this world. People at work, situations where it's impossible. You can't avoid that. That's the way it is. But you can definitely find a balance. God uses the implacable pharaohs of this world not just to drive us out of Egypt and its system, but to drive Egypt's system out of us, the way it did Israel. That's why Jesus said these words, and this to me speaks of a Sabbath in Him, because when we rest, we're resting in God. Whether you take a walk, whether you tend your garden, whether you do your favorite hobby, whether you just take a nap, when you take a day for yourself, you're renewing yourself. But Jesus said this, come to me all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. So I hope this blesses you today. This is what we shared on Sunday. And make sure you check out the church website, destinychristianniagara.com, where you'll find sermons and events and a couple of podcasts, My Sheep Know My Voice and Soul 02. And also, if you're watching this and have never had a chance to partner with us, please consider partnering with us. And you can do it through the website or through the Tidely app and in many other ways. So till next time, so glad to be with you. God bless you and take care.